Hello everyone, this is Kellen Troino, and this is my presentation on the Yucca Mountain Repository Project. Located on federally owned desert land about 100 miles northwest of Las Vegas, Yucca Mountain has been under consideration since the early 1980s as a main site for the geologic disposal of used nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. We could certainly spend hours talking about the Yucca Mountain Project. There's decades. But over the next few minutes, I want to go over the basics. But over the next few minutes, we're going to discuss some of the basics. The objectives for this presentation, we'll be discussing the presentation are going to be to discuss nuclear waste, talk about the nuclear waste disposal problems in America, Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, why Yucca Mountain was chosen by the Department of Energy, federal and state intervention over the recent years, funding and financial ramifications of not opening the Yucca Mountain Repository, the Blue Ribbon Commission of 2012, and the Yucca Mountain today. The method of storing spent radioactive waste has been a controversial topic in the nuclear industry for decades. Government and civilian agencies have explored many different options to store spent radioactive waste. In the 1960s, these options ranged from dumping radioactive waste on the ocean floor to shooting it into outer space. By the early 1980s, a deep geological disposal site was found to be the best idea. There's currently throughout America approximately 77,000 radioactive byproducts fuel, and each year the commercial nuclear industry produces about 2,000 throughout America. There's currently approximately 77,000 the recent accident at Fukushima and the ongoing underground fires in St. Louis produces the need for a fortified and central disposal location, especially considering radioactive waste, Fukushima, and the ongoing underground fires in St. Louis. The 1982 Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which directed the Department of Energy to build and operate a central location. In 1982, Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which directed the Department of Energy to build and operate a central location for nuclear facilities for storing spent radioactive waste. The Department of Energy originally chose 9 different locations. Fuel from $1 billion facilities throughout the country was 1986. The Department of Energy originally chose 9 different locations, research findings, over $1 billion before settling on the Yucca Mountain Department of Energy to exclusively study. In 1987, Congress agreed with the research findings by the Department of Energy. Over the next 20 years, the Department of Energy amended the 5-mile Policy Act as well as the direct Department of Energy to exclusively study the Yucca Mountain numerous studies and experiments. In 2006, the Senate Environment and Public Works Department of Energy dug a 5-mile studied real estate by 2-mile wide tunnel. The Department of Energy claims the repository of Yucca Mountain performed numerous studies designed to limit public radiation. In 2006, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee declared Yucca Mountain the most studied real estate on the planet. According to the Department of Energy claims radioactive waste contained in Yucca Mountain can be isolated to limit public radiation exposure for up to 1 million, yet still be 1,000 feet above according to the Nuclear Energy Institute. I read that scientists dropping 12,000-year-old desert to investigate climatic and vegetation changes in the region since the last ice age. Scientists consistently dry environment. They found that dry such a consistently dry environment under open rock. Of course, nuclear materials at the site would be obviously nuclear, so you can imagine would be better protected. Nuclear fuel would be findings on the way more limitations fortified than makes sense. Pack rat dropping. In 2008, after 2 decades of positive site studies, the Department of Energy applied for a license with the Department of Energy applied for a license to build a facility at Yucca Mountain. According to the Department of Energy, building a central nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain central nuclear waste repository site brings together the best option because the natural barriers, the location elements, natural barriers and design elements most likely to predict, including those Americans living in the immediate vicinity, now and long into the future. Some of the reasons given by the Department of Energy for choosing Yucca Mountain were superior geochemistry, rock characteristics, tectonics, meteorology, and the economic impact. The results of the Department of Energy analysis are heavily scrutinized by the Nuclear Waste Technical Review, which is a panel of independent scientific experts by the President, and specifically appointed by international experts from the International Experts from the International Atomic and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Senate leader Harry Reid from Nevada strongly opposed his state becoming what he termed America's nuclear dumpster. The state of Nevada was not always opposed to the project. In 1975, before the Department of Energy was tasked with finding and developing a nuclear waste disposal site, the state legislature passed a resolution strongly urging the federal agency to choose the Nevada test site where Yucca Mountain is located for the disposal of nuclear wastes. In 2012, Nye County sent a letter to the Secretary of Energy agreeing to host the repository in line with the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission, which we'll get into later, for consent-based siting of such facilities. In 2010, despite direction from the revised Nuclear Waste Policy Act in 1987, President Obama unilaterally stopped the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's licensing review of the Department of Energy's request, calling Yucca Mountain not a workable option. Instead, the Obama administration proposed the Strategy for the Management and Disposal of Used Nuclear Fuel and High-Level Radioactive Waste Policy. This policy allows for the temporary nuclear waste storage facilities with a permanent repository in place by 2048. The courts have actually consistently rejected challenges to the Yucca Mountain selection and licensing process. In August 2013, a federal appeals court ruled that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission must resume its review of the Department of Energy's license application. Last February, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission released the final volume of its safety evaluation report, concluding that Department of Energy's proposed repository as designed will be capable of safely isolating used nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste for the 1 million period specified in the regulations. So the federal court is basically on the side of the Department of Energy. Consumers have paid 1/10 of a cent for every kilowatt hour of electricity produced by nuclear power plants in America. Since 1983, consumers have paid 1/10 of a cent for every kilowatt hour of electricity produced by nuclear power plants in America, with an additional $1 billion of interest gained each year. Over the last 25 years, over $40 billion has been collected by the taxpayer-backed fund, including interest. 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour of electricity may not seem like Policy Act, but when you consider that 798 billion kilowatt hours of electricity were produced using nuclear power in 2014, you can see that it adds up. According to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the Department of Energy was supposed to start removing radioactive waste from nuclear sites by 1998. Failure to do so has resulted in $4 billion taken from the Nuclear Waste Policy Act fund in court-awarded settlements as compensation for companies having to store the spent nuclear fuel themselves. Damages are expected to reach as high as $20 billion by 2020, with a whopping $500 million in fines every year after that. Established in 2012, the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future is tasked with providing advice, evaluating alternatives, and making recommendations for a new plan to manage the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle in the United States. 8 key recommendations were made by the Disposal Committee to the full Commission in their report dated January 2012. I'm only going to mention the first recommendation, as Sam, James, and myself are going to go in plenty more detail on our final project. But the first and most important one, in my opinion, was that the United States should undertake an integrated nuclear waste management program that leads to the timely development of one or more permanent deep geological facilities for the safe disposal of spent fuel and high-level nuclear waste. Marked by only the fenced-off entrance to 7 miles of exploratory tunnels, Yucca Mountain is currently totally abandoned. Potentially the most precisely engineered piece of land ever, the repository is now nowhere near ready to receive nuclear waste. There are no waste disposal tunnels, receiving and handling facilities, and the waste containers and transportation casks have yet to be developed. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission estimates that finishing the project will cost another $330 million. This is a list of some of the references that I used for this project, and I want to thank you guys for taking the time and listening.